Good evening. My name is Eric Kirk. This is Redwood Wonk. I am with Dave Frank. Dave, how you doing today?
Doing great. Thanks for having me join you today. I appreciate it.
All right. Well, we have a lot to talk about today, and we're going to start with maybe a crisis, maybe Biden's first major international crisis. We'll see how it turns out. But the president of Haiti, his name is Moise. I hope I'm saying it right. Moise is was assassinated early this morning by unknown men. The only thing we think we might know about him, although it's unclear as to whether it's even true, because the acting prime minister is saying that at least some of the men involved were speaking Spanish. The widow was also injured and hospitalized. Presumably, she would have been the source of that. I don't know if anybody else were witnesses, but we don't know much about why or how. Well, we know about how they stormed his house with guns, managed to get past whatever security he had. And this is, of course, the latest in a long history of drama from a country that has just from its roots been a difficult one. It was overthrown, slavery was overthrown by Toussaint Louverture and others at the time. Very bloody civil war that led to, or war of independence that led to that. They were one of the first states to be free in that sense, but they pretty much faced boycotts immediately from all the nations around them. They have been for a long time the poorest nation in the Western Hemisphere. They've had issues going back to mid 20th century when the regimes of Papa Doc and later his son Baby Doc ruled with kind of an iron hand, with a lot of help from the United States, the CIA, who saw them as part of, one of those reasons that he may be our son of a bitch. He may be a son of a bitch, but he's our son of a bitch. Cold War politics of us supporting regimes like this. There looked like to be some hope for reform when President Aristide came. He was a movement person who came to power in the early 90s, was ousted later in a military coup. Long history of military coups here. Moise was elected in 2015, but for one reason or another that is unclear, he claims fraud. He canceled or actually nullified the last election, and has been in power, past his time ever since. The place was rocked by a horrible earthquake about a decade ago that caused damage that still hasn't been all repaired. There isn't a whole lot of arable agricultural land. It's always been an issue. It's worse because some of the practices that have been used over the years actually depleted the soil. The place has been completely de-logged, over the years, because in poverty, it's all they have to keep warm in the winter. There's hardly any trees left. It's striking when you see the photographs of, from orbit, of the contrast between the western part of the island that they share with the Dominican Republic. Of course, the reference to the possibility that the assassins were Spanish, nobody is saying it, but they're wondering if this is a dog whistling to play up on nationalism against the Dominican Republic. They've been at odds with each other. Dominican Republic tends to be a bit better off. They look down on Haitians. I'm sure Haitians hate Dominicans for a number of reasons, including the fact that the border it's really hard to get across. And anyway, I mean, a whole slew of issues here, long history. Something we should know. French-speaking slave colony originally, and has just the country. Our previous president, it was one of the countries that he referred to as an S-hole. And anyway, it will be, the story is developing. Biden came out with a statement saying that this was deplorable, not saying what or if anything he's going to do about it, but it is a bit of a crisis because there definitely is a crisis in Haiti, potentially, destabilizing. Dave?
Yeah, so it's a complicated situation, of course, and its news is evolving kind of as we speak. It's funny because when you started talking, I did see a press release from the interim Prime Minister, Claude Joseph, who said that they are in control and they did arrest the presumed assassins, but who knows if that's actually true or not. Also, the Haitian Haitian ambassador to the United States said that they were they were wearing US DEA uniforms, which doesn't exist. They don't. DEA agents don't wear uniforms.
Right.
I don't think. So it's just a way. It's an otherization of their own internal conflict. So yeah, like I said, it's to be determined how it's going to play out. But I did hear some coverage earlier this afternoon that was talking about how almost all the institutions there have failed, either literally or through just a crisis of confidence. Their legitimacy has been undermined by this president, who went on the record as saying he didn't acknowledge the election and there's no way to vote him out of office if he's not going to go no matter what happens. Riddled with crime, narco trafficking, and all sorts of terrible situations on the ground. And as you said, the United States does have a long involvement there. So, for example, the election between John Adams and Jefferson, Haiti played an issue because that's when there was this rebellion that you described. Adams was somebody who said that he thought that it would be great for them to, embrace some of the revolutionary principles of democracy, participation, self-rule. Jefferson, as an ally of the French, was opposed to that. So the history of Haiti might have been a little different if Adams beat Jefferson in that election, but he didn't. And we've been entangled ever since. So it's complicated, but it's also very tragic. And people might ask, why is the United States involved? And it's because we've always been involved.
Yeah, well, I want to recommend a book. It's a few decades old. I don't know if it's been rewritten, but it's one I read in college. Eric Foner wrote a book called Nothing But Freedom, and it was about a lot of slavery in and outside the United States. But he drew some interesting parallels about how slave owners in this country would use the failures of countries like Haiti to say, kind of like today, it's aimed at socialist countries where the economy isn't working well. See, socialism doesn't work because of the Soviet Union. They have big lines and the rest. So it's they would use that against the Caribbean islands that had shaken off slavery. And of course, with the white flight and the capital flight, things were no longer, things weren't easy for that reason alone. Very similar to the socialist states, but a book I'd recommend on just the history of it. Again, we don't know. The claim that the prime minister is making is that they spoke both Spanish and English. That doesn't sound very efficient to me. You'd think they would choose one language or the other with what they're doing, and they were successful. So anyway, concluding thoughts?
Yeah, like I said, we think we have to see how this plays out, but just based on some of the reporting from in country, they had originally, their legal system would require the head of the Supreme Court to take over, but he had been displaced recently, so that's a vacancy, and it's not really clear what the smooth transition to power will be here. So it's fairly tragic, but hopefully that there'll be some international consensus, investigation, new elections, and they can kind of bridge this current tragedy towards a new path in the at least medium term.
All right, we'll probably be talking about this in the weeks to come. That takes us to the next topic. All right. We're a little bit of an update on the politics here around January 6th and the insurrection. The far right seems to be really trying to turn Ashley Babbitt, the woman who was shot and killed in the Capitol, into a martyr. And it is the discussion has made its way into Congress, where Senator Kozar has basically said that the officer who shot her was a murderer, whereas Republican Kinzinger, who is one of the kind of anti-Trump or never-Trumper resistance within the Republican Party, has called him a hero. There is a lawsuit, of course, was filed a couple weeks ago by the parents of Ashley Babbitt. There's going to be a lot of discussion around that. All this as the select committee that we've been discussing is coming into formation. There are going to be 13 people on the House members on the committee. Democrats are reserving 7 for themselves. Plus, Nancy Pelosi chose to pick one of the Republicans of the 6 Republicans who will be on it, and of course, she chose Liz Cheney, who is probably figuring she's not going to be in office by next year. We'll see, but is probably in a gambit looking for something, a career change in which she will be the sort of the standard bearer of the never Trumper sign. The other things that are happening are that Mo Brooks, who is being sued by Eric Swalwell for inciting January 6th, is now, as his defense, trying to get out of the case, saying that as a federal employee, he cannot be accused of this incitement. I read a little bit about the article. I haven't done any research. The legal argument doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me, but it's. But at any rate, the politics are heating up, and I think as this committee starts to form, we're going to see a lot more of it. There might be, lulls, but it's probably going to play into next year, which is exactly why some of the Republicans said that they were opposing the independent commission.
Right. Yeah, so I would say, from 30,000 feet, which is, I guess, best place to start here. We just reached the 6-month anniversary since the event. And it's this investigation is kind of playing out. The potential for the investigation is playing out in slow motion. People are still releasing new videos and photos. For example, Senator Sherrod Brown yesterday released photos he took of ransacked offices and the aftermath of the event and rampage. Also, police body cameras fairly recently were released showing the facial expressions of some of these folks who were being charged. As you said, almost 600 people now have been arrested. It started out a much smaller number, sprinkled across a set of militias and white nationalist groups.
Oath keepers.
Oath keepers, yeah. 3%ers. I forget the third, honestly, that I just saw recently. But basically, the current threat assessment of the Sergeant at Arms of the U.S. Senate, he's claiming that he endorses the Capitol Police Board's recommendation to remove the barriers that are around the Capitol, which they call a temporary perimeter safety fence. They're going to do that starting this weekend, I guess.
Right. Yeah.
So that's the physical threat of, is it a quote unquote armed insurrection? That they're determining based on all the social media chatter there's no longer an immediate threat of that nature. But now, as in addition to the investigation, what we're seeing is the political side, as you alluded to. So, Vanity Fair just ran an article yesterday, I believe, or in the last few days, where they talked about how hundreds of House and Senate candidates are still endorsing the big lie. And according to the Washington Post, at least a third of the 700 Republicans who've already filed to run for a House or Senate seat are making this the core. Stolen election is the core of their campaign. So that's why we're seeing so much, like I said, inflammatory language from some of the sitting Congress folks out there.
Well, and I guess it was a revelation, and I don't know why we didn't hear about this earlier. But Boebert, one of the woman who's famous for carrying guns into the Capitol, apparently had tweeted the day before, tomorrow was 1776, and they want to question her as to why she said that. What was she expecting to happen? Other quotes like that coming from some of the Republicans that haven't been talked about, but they were clearly expecting something, and they want to look again at that video of Trump and his family and associates in the tent before the rally starting, playing Julia, dancing to Gloria, pardon me, the song Gloria, which, by the way, was about a woman driven insane by obsessed over a guy. I don't know why they've chosen that as their anthem, but what were they expecting that they were so happy about? Were they expecting just to have a rah-rah, go to have a rally and hold signs and chant? Did they expect that just having that rally was going to change what was happening inside? There seemed to be an enthusiasm there that this select committee is going to investigate, in which an independent commission might have blocked.
Yeah. So they're like we talked about in prior show. There are folks out there who have captured social media images, maybe things that may have been deleted, or other things that are a building case of evidence about how this was at a planned party where people were flown in on corporate jets they were partying the night before, and there was they sort of this disconnect in reality of what the implications might be of stirring up the pot in the way that they did. But I think more importantly is kind of now looking backwards at what happened, even if they didn't quite plan it. A lot of these folks in Congress are now still running cover. So like you talked about Representative Paul Gosar, Arizona congressman. He's out there trying to basically vilify the police officer whose hand was in the video shooting the martyr, so to speak. And so Ashley Babbitt, they're saying she was executed, and it's a way to, again, galvanize the troops and sort of draw battle lines in the domestic political sphere, and aggravate the situation rather than get to a better understanding and try to get past it.
Yeah, but I don't think this is a good electoral strategy for them. I mean, they should win the midterms, and this could undo it for them. They should retake both the Senate and the House, but the Select Committee is going to be at the height of its investigation by then. And like I said, there's no limits on what they can subpoena. They're going to want to have McCarthy testify about his conversation with Trump, and it's going to be a focus. But again, as I've said before, Trump pretty much vetoed an independent commission because he doesn't really care about the fortunes of the Republican Party. He wants to look good, right? And so it's so there, and I'm sure that if you can get into the brains of people like McConnell and maybe even McCarthy, they hate him. They hate Trump, but they can't say it because they're stuck with him because they can't take on that base. And they've got to find a way to get that base motivated to turn out. But they didn't turn out in 2018. That's how the Democrats won 30 seats, because they tend to be focused on Trump. And if they come out, are they going to vote for the swing state people, the 10 that voted for impeachment? And if they don't, if they run Trump people in the primaries, those are moderate districts. They will have a hard time holding on to those. So he could be blowing a chance. Trump and the movement could be blowing a chance for him again, because the majority of people in independents voted for Biden because against the craziness of what they saw. And it's just amplified.
I mean, I think this is just, again, not to belabor the point, but I do think it's all part of a broader strategy of otherization. Make America great again, and stop the steal. These are like trademark. They're looking for some idealized past that actually is not reality. America's got a complicated history, and we're all part of it, and we all have our own perspectives based on our experiences. They're playing to the folks whose experiences aren't rich, wide, robust enough to understand where our path is trending us towards. For example, Black Lives Matter and the critical race theory lump argument about how looking at our challenged traditions are not the same thing as being racist. So this is just another way to galvanize the base, leverage their energy. And I think, fortunately, there will be, to a certain extent, a reckoning for posterity, for history's sake, when someone like Liz Cheney gets up and makes the case that we ought to just be honest and open about what really happened.
I don't think I've made mistakes. I mean, every time somebody says I made a mistake, they do the polls and my numbers go up. So I guess I haven't made any mistakes.
We showed up and we demonstrated that we would not have our voices silenced by a Republican Party that across the country had a singular intention on suppressing the right to vote.
Some Democratic senators seem to imagine they could just break the rules on a razor-thin majority. Nothing would stand between them and their entire agenda, a new era of fast-track policymaking.
The Republican Party moved very far away from reality. And the fact that you got colleagues of mine in the Senate who refuse even today to acknowledge that Donald Trump lost the election. How do you deal with that?
Joe Biden is the president we need right now. Battle-tested, forward-looking, honest and authentic. He has never forgotten who he is fighting for.
And that brings us to the Delta variant and the politics of vaccines. It's played out in really strange ways, not across the country and even locally in Humboldt County. But the Delta variant, as reported on NPR this morning and probably everywhere else, is now the dominant source of infections. It is killing or making sick younger people than the other variants, and the vaccines, while they aren't specifically tuned in to that particular one because it developed after these vaccines were developed, it is proving effective, not as effective against the older variants, but it is keeping people out of hospitals. I believe what they're saying is basically the vaccinated people, anywhere fewer than 1% of the people that are dying are vaccinated in both ones. Other countries, it's a little bit different for reasons I want to get into it. So the figure's higher in Britain, but that's because almost everybody's been vaccinated. So, it's just, and we're talking about the difference between older people and not, but but the states in which the vaccine rates are lower are higher in Delta variant and infections in general. The science seems to be fairly conclusive at this point. I'm sure we'll have more systemized studies about it, but it's just basically, if you're not vaccinated, you're taking a real chance. And even locally, Rex Bone has been on the radio, all the radio stations, pushing for people to get vaccinated. And he's, represents a constituency of people that are more resistant than other constituencies. Dave?
Yeah, I mean, it's about persuasion. So I think a message of facts, data, and perspective is what's going to take for the people that are on the fence, people that are skeptical, that don't want to be told what to do or don't want to be a, quote unquote guinea pig, a risky recipient of some part of a larger, broader conspiracy that they might be afraid of, that they've been told from certain leaders and voices that's what they're a part of. But the reality of it is that this new strain is much more virile and it's spreading faster and it's also hitting harder. But as of Wednesday, I think the number is about 67% of adults in the U.S. have had one dose, and 58% are fully vaccinated. So we're approaching that point where we're starting to see this tale of two cities. The average number of cases, it was staying under 14,000 a day for a long time here now, but it is going up. and it's going up because of localized outbreaks in places where vaccination levels are low, like Missouri, Arkansas, Nevada. So when asked, when the president is asked, hey, look, you've got this problem here, what are you going to do about it? His spokesperson, Jen Psaki, she said, well, the president wants to leave it to the states and local public health officials. So that's kind of where we are, I think, is that if you are in a place where there is some skepticism, we are seeing Republican leaders in some states starting to kind of turn the corner on this, like you said, Rex Bone is. And one last thing here about the sort of big picture of it all. The effectiveness, new studies are coming out all the time. So as the new data comes out, it's important to kind of wrap your head around how effective the vaccines really are on this. And not to get too into the weeds on the technicalities, but it was originally over 90%. Now it's under 90%, depending on the study. Unfortunately, there is one study, which is a little bit of an outlier, which is Israel, which talks about how the efficacy has dropped from 95% down to like 64%. But that hasn't. That's in part because Delta variant is pretty much near 100% of what they're dealing with there. It's certainly the majority, and the Delta variant has the Delta plus. So as it spreads in the unvaccinated population, it's evolving even further and getting even more likely to hurt people, to affect and infect people who are not vaccinated. So
right,
we are.
And of course it is helping with not just with preventing infections, but preventing the serious effects of it. And it may very well be that one of the differences between Israel and us is they're counting infections, whereas we're kind of focusing on people who are hospitalized and the rest. So we might have lower the same lower effect in terms of absolutely preventing an infection. But if people are asymptomatic, it's probably not on our chart, whereas Israel has a very well-organized healthcare system that is probably tracking it all.
Yeah, and I would add to what you said and agree and add that one of the issues that I heard today at Johns Hopkins, Michael Bloomberg School of Public Health official, faculty member, what she was saying was that having the virus, if it's just in your nose, and your body having an effective vaccine, Pfizer and Moderna, could keep you from getting sick. Yeah. So you actually, like you said, you could have it, but none of the 10,000 known serious complications, no hospitalization, no death, and that managing the harm is ultimately the goal, and it's. I'm trying to state the word. It's not. It's impossible to sterilize the human body from these things. But what we can do is mitigate the harm, and that strategy seems effective, especially in a country like ours where we are approaching that 70% number that we were targeting.
I don't want to go everything. We talk Trump, but this is one area where I really think he's failing the country, because he and his wife got vaccinated back in January. Even though he had already had it, and but he kept it a secret so that a lot of his supporters think it's fake news. When his daughter Ivanka went and vaccinated and put it onto social media that she had been vaccinated, the Trumpers attacked her viciously, saying she's has basically conformed to the deep state and all of that, and is playing into the propaganda, and they just lit into her hard. Why didn't her father come to her defense and say, I got it too? Here, you're hearing it from me now. I'm on a microphone here. I got it too. You should do it so that you don't die. It's just the fact that he isn't doing it is just, I always wonder if I'm cynical, if this is a guy who is, really does have good thoughts at heart, but he's just, a fascist or whatever, but really believes in what he's doing. It just tells me he's just in it for Trump. I'm sorry, I don't. It sounds oversimplified, but the fact that he isn't out there like Rex Bone and some of the other Republicans is just, I say, profoundly irresponsible. Because his group, of course, we've got the chemtrail hippies in our community and the rest, but their numbers are nowhere near this particular constituency. It's definitely not all right wingers that aren't doing this, but when you're looking at the states that you talked about, it's in those states where this problem is happening at its worst, and it's profoundly irresponsible. How does he expect to get reelected if all of his people die? I'm sorry, it's getting to be that crazy.
Yeah, and again, I feel like broken record here a little bit, but the science is there, and preventing hospitalizations, preventing death ought to be the goal. We do see places like New York, Florida, California that are either opened or considering opening. You've got, more broadly, businesses and schools coming up in the fall. So with that in mind, I am kind of tracking a little bit what's happening with vaccinations of people under 12. I guess that last group, 12 to 16, I think, right. got what we're talking about here is that we will, in theory, be able to get that data published and agreed upon and disseminated and roll out the vaccine is plentiful. Children, I think down to 2 years old ultimately are going to start getting it, getting the vaccination, and then that because they're a significant vector. Many of them aren't getting symptoms. They're not. We don't know that they're sick, but it seems like I hate to say it, but there's studies out there. Birthday parties are like super spreader events. None of the kids even are symptomatic, but they're spreading it fairly broadly. So getting returning to some degree of normalcy by expanding vaccinations to youth will be an incredible turn of events just at the right time in the fall when another surge might ordinarily have happened just based on environmental factors and timing cycles of just how the 1918 pandemic kind of played out.
Okay, we sometimes look at local elections that have national significance. The one that has had the attention of both political parties and people across the country because of for a number of reasons is the New York City mayor's race. It appears to have been resolved. It does appear that former police chief, I don't think he was a chief, but he was high up, Eric Adams has won. That they finally did clear out all the false all of the false ballots that had been inadvertently, there were like over 100,000 or something test ballots that were sent in that led to the resignation of an election official. But they appear to have cleaned it up, and it appears that Eric Adams has won. In the first round, I'll be interested to see if there's any data that comes out about second ranked choice, voting and all that. But his two closest, the two people that came closest to him have conceded, and it is done, and it'll be interesting because this guy is not a conservative by any means. He does try to portray himself as the reason that he isn't favored by the police unions and the right is because he's been pushing for reform within that context. But he is dead set against defund the police. And as an African American, that's a powerful position for him to take. And he probably will be more skeptical of a lot of police reform issues, and the rise in crime across the country, whether you blame it on the pandemic or other factors, was probably a factor in this election.
Yeah, so like you said, Captain Eric Adams declared the winner. I think that, when you sort of do the forensics of, what happened exactly, he did have what we could call a working class background. His personal history of him saying, look, I was abused by the police as a teenager, but I did something about it by joining the police, being a vocal critic of the discriminatory policing that took place when I was young, a young officer. Then he transitioned his career into becoming a state senator, Brooklyn, a popular Brooklyn borough president. And so, now he's kind of got this public stature where he's saying, I'm the face of the Democratic Party. Nationally, you ought to realize, you guys, like you said, Eric, that we ought not be saying defund the police. We ought not be saying, end the police, but amend or mend or something.
Right. So reallocate.
Yeah, exactly. Reallocate. I mean, we could talk about what police reform looks like. There's a long list of things that would be incredibly popular and also effective, but that's not the topic for today. You had alluded to ranked choice voting, sort of what could be learned, and I think the story's still to be told as it unfolds, but the New York Times does have a pretty extensive accounting of some of the early implications and insights. So one of the things is that in New York City, the ballots could be cured. So if the ballot had looked like a flaw, there was a period of time where they could actually contact the people who voted and then have them sort of fix a mark to make it more effective, more accepted. So that's one thing that we could learn from, I would say, is that a two-way dialogue is possible in an election to make it more democratic, small d. But also some of these ballots are exhausted. So if in a ranked choice voting, if your preferences don't make it to the final two rounds, if the two head-to-head candidates that make it all the way, then if you don't have them on further on down as your choice 4, choice 5, then your ballot is exhausted. So what they figured out is there's a large enough number of exhausted ballots that if people voted strategically slightly differently, it could have changed the outcome of the race.
Right. Yeah. Or maybe if the candidates did work together, one candidate was actually saying vote for me first and them second and the rest, and the other candidate wasn't doing it. It's a new brand of politics. We don't, the models will come up about what's effective and how to make use of it, but it doesn't look like it was very effective this time around. I also need to clarify, it is not. Well, okay, it's 99.99% certain that Eric Adams will be the next mayor, but this was a primary. They have partisan primaries, and there is a Republican opponent. His name is Curtis Sliwa, co-founder of the Guardian Angels, used to be a lot more famous, group of outright vigilantes who basically had a uniform that included a beret and a white T-shirt, and they would wander around, and in theory, neighborhoods would be safer when they were there, although that's contested, and the rest far too right-wing to have much of a chance of being elected in New York City. But it will be interesting. It'll be interesting to see if Eric Adams debates him. He came out strongly in favor of Bernard Goetz's rights. Bernard Goetz was, I don't call him a vigilante necessarily. He was supposedly defending himself, apparently, for African-American youth were threatening him back in, I think it was 1984. One of them had a screwdriver, which he later said, well, it's for breaking into parking meters, not as a weapon, blah, blah, blah. But anyways, he ended up shooting him as they were trying to run away, and was acquitted, basically. Or I think, I forget exactly what happened, but Sliwa was completely in favor of this guy, and to the degree that police officials had kind of supported his efforts before. They did not want to encourage people pulling out their guns and, the good guy with a gun and just shooting people who are running away. And so Sliwa was a bit extreme, but it'll be an interesting campaign. We'll see if there are actually any debates. I don't know if Adams will bother.
Just in terms of getting perspective on the size majority, the mismatch between registered Democrats and registered Republicans in the city of New York. 820,000 Democrats voted in person. This is according to the New York Times. 126,000 Democrats absentee. Turnout about 1,945,000 voters. That's only a quarter of the nearly 4 million registered Democrats in the city. So contrast that with the registered Republicans. Curtis Sliwa got about 55,000 in-person votes, 5,800 absentee ballots. That's 61,000 ballots, which is 10% of the city's registered 600,000 Republicans. So it's a huge mismatch. 3.7 million. It's sixfold domination of Democrats over Republicans in the city. So that's why you're 99.9.
Yeah, which we were discussing last week. It's such a concentration of Democrats. Like I said last week, if they decide they want to gerrymander and spread Queens and crowds and Bronx and all of them out to the east end of Long Island and split up Staten Island, they can nix 3 Republican congressmen right then and there. That's how powerful that is and how democratic they are. Culturally, not necessarily the most liberal politician. Being Democrat doesn't necessarily make you culturally liberal. New York City is more culturally conservative than places like San Francisco or Seattle or even Philadelphia. It's got its own unique independent history. Giuliani was elected mayor there. As amazing as that might seem to people who are just familiar with him for recently. So at any rate, we'll see what happens. We'll see what this says about the future of New York politics. But it's not always the liberal person who wins there.
Yeah, I would just say this one last comment here on Curtis Sliwa and his history is I'm originally from the East Coast. And, so I was very young at the time, but I do remember going into the city with other kids. And, our parents thought it was safe enough for us to do that, take the subway, take the train in from New Jersey, take the subway. And I do remember as at least as a child, young, under 16-ish, seeing the guardian angels everywhere and thinking that was kind of cool. So there is some sentimentality of some of the voters may have, especially if they're, an older cohort, of just what it was like for citizen safety patrols to give that maybe nostalgic solidarity vote, but it's not going to be enough, I don't believe, in a city like New York.
No, and if he'd stayed out of politics, out of partisan politics, he might be in a much better position right now, even as a Republican. But I don't think a Republican's ever going to win again. It's not the same city it was.
I, Richard Bilhouse Nixon, do solemnly swear.
I, Gerald R. Ford, do solemnly swear.
I, Jimmy Carter, do solemnly swear.
I, Ronald Reagan, do solemnly swear.
I, George Herbert Walker Bush, do solemnly swear.
I, William Jefferson Clinton, do solemnly swear.
I, George Walker Bush, do solemnly swear.
I, Barack Hussein Obama, do solemnly swear.
I, Donald John Trump, do solemnly swear.
I, Joseph Robinette Biden Jr., do solemnly swear. So help me God.
All right, that takes us to our last topic. Okay, heat waves in the Pacific Northwest, record-breaking temperatures everywhere, from 118 in Siberia to up in Canada. The Antarctic it's breaking records there. It's finally catching up in terms of the reality, and there actually is a glimmer of hope with the Senator Curtis of Utah, saying that creating what they're calling the Conservative Climate Change Caucus. And they're being very cautious in their wording, not endorsing any legislation. They're saying they're not going to endorse legislation, but they are looking to open up a dialogue within the Republican Party to say, this is happening. What do we want to do about this? And so I saw an interview with him today that is very interesting. He says it's kind of like us talking to progressives about the wall. They don't want to hear about it. We don't want to be in the same position where we don't, we want to talk about free market solutions and all of that, the carbon credits and all of that. Even though companies are endorsing it, it's still not popular within the Republican Party. Even though the Club for Growth is endorsing it, because they just do not want to bend on the issue that climate change is a fake science. And so this guy's got an uphill battle, being very cautious, but apparently other people within the Republican Party are interested in talking about it, because we're about to have our hottest summer on record. We've already started it, and that's a hard thing to get around, to say, oh, there's no problems with it, when people are dying in record numbers because of the heat.
Yeah, so just why is this on our radar so solidly right now? This Oregon heat wave, which is similar to the heat dome that we had in the southern western states about a week or so ago. Now it's in the Northwest. It's declared a mass casualty event. There were over 100 deaths last week in Oregon alone. People all ages, 37 to 97. Triple digits for the entire week. When back in the day, we used to talk about hypothermia when you get too cold. That was relatively common thing to talk about, but now we're actually talking about hyperthermia, where people are dying from their body temperature being too high. So that
a lot of the buildings there don't even have air conditioners because they've never needed it, right? It's same reason we don't have heat sinks in our buildings in California.
Yeah. So of course, it's a great time for people to break out new studies and try to make evidentiary claims about what we're witnessing and how it comes to be, so that we can make the case for how to do something about it. The takeaway headline of a new study is that climate change is killing people. Heat is the #1 weather-related killer in America. So that's happening. So regardless of what people want to be the case, when these studies come out, we have to at least try to pay some attention to them. So it's not peer reviewed yet, but looking at today's warming world, this heat event that we just experienced over the last 2 weeks is a once in a millennium event. So that means it would occur every 5 to 10 years at some point. Based on our current models, this is going to occur once every 5 to 10 years. So that means, within 40 or 50 years, this is the new normal, and that's just incredible to imagine. And so the way they do it is they take data and they log it into 21 different computer models, and they run simultaneous simulations. And this sounds technical, but the reality is they're able to strip out, well, what would we do if we didn't keep burning coal, oil, natural gas the way we are? And then the two simulations side by side, they'd say, without climate change, for sure, what we are experiencing now would not have happened. So they are able to basically say we have the smoking gun. So I'm interested in seeing how this plays out, not just with people who are willing to listen to a study by the National Academy of Sciences, but something with other folks who currently were not so willing.
But we have an immediate problem too. Fox News is going to put out a Fox Weather channel that is basically going to be set up primarily to debunk climate change, saying, well, this is just natural cycles. It'll all get better in a few years, and I hope they're right. But it's basically a weather channel being put together to eliminate and counter what they could call climate change or global warming propaganda. I mean, and it's just it's amazing. But again, they're going to be arguing against what's actually happening to people physically. So it's going to be a pretty difficult situation. They're going to have to convince them that it's natural, and the counter is going to have to be, well, what if it is natural? Can we change it by reducing? What if it? Can we mitigate it by reducing our carbon output? Or planting more trees or whatever. I mean, but we're in that phase here again, and it's similar to the vaccines, where very survival is there. And you say that heat is now the #1 weather killer. I mean, usually it's cold up until now. It's been the cold where people didn't, people's heaters were turned off or whatever, that people died, on that. It used to be the #1 cause of death. We all read To Build a Fire by Jack London. We're all familiar with that kind of death, but this is kind of something new because we've had heat over the years, and cultures that live in the heat have found ways to deal with it and minimize their casualties. But we've got a population that's not ready, and the only thing we have is air conditioning, which, as we know, aggravates the problem. And then once the ice starts melting, then you've got dark land that absorbs the heat rather than warding it off, and it just reinforces itself. The heat keeps anyway. I mean, we've been through this, and it's frustrating, but there is still going to be some pushback, which is why I'm hoping that Senator Curtis can, however, gradually move people along some, and maybe undermine some of the resistance. I hope.
Yeah, just to add to this, I recently, our state senator, Mike McGuire, he had a town hall about a month or so ago that had to do with wildfires and drought. And one of the experts that he brought onto that town hall, his name was Michael Wera, who's the director of Climate and Energy Program at Stanford. And I remember him saying during that call that when they first started doing climate models, they were predicting extreme outcomes 100 years into the future, and those extreme outcomes are here now. So it's some of the brightest minds in our state, and some of the the public planners in our region, the water utility folks, and the fire, Cal Fire. They all already know about the reality that we face here, and it's time for according to some of these experts, it's time for a tenfold investment over what we're investing now in trying to figure out what to do just within our own community about mitigating the loss of water and the increasing incidence of fire. So more broadly than just what are we going to do about energy and carbon? It's literally an all hands on deck. Everything, all strategies are on the table. I think I recall hearing that California is already committed to spend. Governor Newsom is committed to spend $5 billion, I think this year, which is the equivalent of what the national government is planning on spending for the whole country. So if our state experts are saying that we as a state need a tenfold increase over what we're currently spending on this problem, nationally it's like minuscule what they're doing, and not to be hyperbolic, but a massive wake-up call for us to really figure out some bold strategies to do something different, or else it's going to be a pretty horrific summer with frequent death and not just discomfort, but like we got to do something drastically different than what we're doing.
Yeah, and just not to be overly scary, but my wife and my son are driving across to the East Coast, and they were taking Highway 44 out of Redding. Couldn't see Mount Shasta because there were fires there and the haze, but they drove right by Mount Lassen, no snow on it whatsoever. And that does tend to happen later in the season sometimes, but not this early. It's a scary moment, and I'm hoping that more people get scared. Okay, this is the time, the point of the show at which we provide our predictions, which may or may not come true. We'll find out. We'll talk about it at the end of the year. But Dave, what have you got for us?
Yeah, so for predictions, I wish this wasn't what I'm predicting. Again, I think I said that last week. But so Hunter Biden's laptop is the gift that keeps on giving. So to borrow a line from a Real Clear Politics article, I'm going to call this the I Know a Guy scandal. So according to Charles Lipson, who is the Peter B. Ridsma Professor of Political Science Emeritus at the University of Chicago, founder of the Program on International Politics, Economics, and Security, so not a wingnut by any means. Hunter Biden repeatedly refers to his father as the big guy, and the big guy seems to get a cut into business deals either directly through ownership or indirectly through leveraging his status for access to revenue streams. So it's unfortunate, but this family drama, this Hunter Biden family drama that played out through some of the communications that were recently made public, emails and texts, they've revived the conversation around influence peddling and the president. So mainstream media have not quite picked up on these revelations, but there are new leaks providing circumstantial evidence that Hunter Biden traveled on Air Force Two to both China and Mexico, met with associates of billionaires from these countries at the vice president's residence, and there was a degree of self-dealing that took place, not necessarily in an illegal way, but it will tarnish the image of the sitting president. My prediction is that corruption and the monetization of Joe Biden's influence will become a centerpiece of the Republican campaign efforts in the 22 and 24 election cycles, and that this time, without Trump in the White House as a common enemy, perhaps the social media giants will not be as quick to block the spread of this supposed misinformation.
Okay, well, we'll see. Of course, one of the takes out of that has been that Hunter Biden was trying to sell himself as a influence peddler, but he really couldn't deliver. And if anything, they should feel ripped off because of that. But we'll see how the story develops. I want to go to a moment of optimism here. Take a moment of optimism in my prediction. Today there was a demonstration in Kabul of women holding guns in defiance of the Taliban. I heard an interview on NPR a couple of weeks ago. A Afghan commander who did not sound all that worried said, yeah, we are losing some ground, but we have a number of missions. We anticipate that we're going to be able to regain much of that by the end of the year of what we've lost. And everybody's afraid that it's the minute we're gone, it's going to collapse with the helicopter scenes of Vietnam. That may happen, but I'm seeing signs that there's panic. A lot of people do want to get out of there, but I'm seeing some hopeful signs that there is actually will in Afghanistan to not go back. The women have been a strong force. When the Allies went into Kandahar in the initial invasion in 2002, women piled up their burqas into a pile, set them on fire in protest. There's definitely a will there. Now, if they're up against a very, force that will throw acid in their faces or kill them, shoot them in the head, we've seen this before. I'm going to predict that the Afghan society and government does not fall to the Taliban again. They may be a protracted civil war, that the Taliban will have spheres of influence outside the city, but I think that there is a will to pull Afghanistan into the 21st century, and that once we're gone, from our primary military position, it may actually happen. I mean, we've been there for 20 years. If it's not going to take root now, when will it? So, my moment of optimism. All right, that wraps up this week's Redwood Wonk. We will be back next week. A lot of stories already developing, but we'll see what is in the headlines by that time. So I want to thank you, Dave. I want to thank Matt behind the scenes here. And until next time, keep thinking.